Hello, welcome to the Mild Opinion Podcast, episode 7. I am Logan,
And I'm Luke.
and today we're going to be talking about horror movies because last night me and Luke went and watched Sinners in the theater, and that got us stuck thinking, what are we going to do for this week's episode and everything? Brought us onto like the horror scene and all that. So that's what we're talking about today. But let's start it off with the topic of conversation, Sinners.
Sinners, starting off with our recency bias. We both thought that it was an awesome movie. And to preface the movie, if you have not seen it, we'll start with the spoiler warning because we will talk a little bit about it in depth. But it's kind of action horror thriller esque. But it's very heavy into like horror, and it was just very. I just felt like very like entranced by it the whole time I was watching it.
Yeah, and well, I told you last night, like after the movie, as soon as we walked out of the theater, I was like, yeah, like from the trailer and everything, and the actors and what I've seen about it, I had very high expectations going into it. But like, even like after seeing it, like it still blew my expectations out of the water. Like it was better than I even assumed it was gonna be, and I assumed that it was gonna be excellent.
Yeah, because I feel like there's a very like cookie cutter existence to a lot of like vampire things, and they with this movie really found a way to make it very like new and fresh. And I was telling you about it that especially like the setting of it helped with that. But I feel like the main reason I watched it and enjoyed it so much was because Michael B. Jordan, who plays two characters in the movie, killed it in both roles, and was just a very like intense and very interesting presence in both roles, and that brought like I guess like the heart of the movie to a different level than if he wasn't in it.
Yeah, I agree. And also, just in general, one of the things I really loved about it, because the acting and all the characters were fantastic, but I also really loved that it was like kind of like period PC and everything. And like as much as it was horror, because it's about like vampires and supernatural things and stuff like that, there was also just like a good story behind it. Like it wasn't like one of those horror movies where like you come in and it's just scary all the time. Because it's like, to be honest, it wasn't really even like that scary.
It was like freaky, but it wasn't like scary. It was just very it played its strengths very well, but it wasn't terrifying.
And I think it's one of those things like the story really like sold. You know what I mean? Like it was like it sold itself. Like it was so good.
And I think with like a lot of horror movies, a lot of them like sacrifice like the real like depth and story and like development of characters for the scare factors.
Yeah.
But they did a good job of telling you why these horrific things are going to happen, and then I honestly felt like at a certain point in the movie I was like, we're 40 it feels like we were like 45 minutes into the movie and nothing like extremely supernatural all that much had happened, but they just laid a lot of groundwork with the characters. They gave you a lot of backstory, and they let you kind of like sit with them and get a feel for who each of them were. And I felt like that was something that like made when the horrific things start happening, it like elevated that too, because it's like, oh, it's not just people in this horrifying scenario, it's people that we've just like been exposed to and learned their circumstances and their backstories and their motivations all up to this point, and now the horror starts.
Yeah, and I think that is kind of what one of the things that made it so good is like you learn about all these characters. You're like, all right, like this guy's cool, this guy's cool. They're doing their thing. Like this guy's funny. You know, you've learned like the backstories of them and stuff. And then all of a sudden they're fighting vampires and people are dying and stuff like that. And you're like, oh my gosh, like not him or like not her, not her character. Because it wasn't one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, you know, here are these people that you met 5 minutes ago. Now they're being attacked by ghosts.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there was like a whole story apart from just the vampires, and the both aspects of it, the non-horror and the vampire storylines, are both just awesome.
Yeah, and another thing about it too is this movie's directed by Ryan Coogler, who's done stuff like Black Panther, and he did like the Creed movies and stuff. So he Michael B. Jordan, obviously he's like his go-to guy. But I heard several things about like this movie is like Ryan Coogler's like passion project, like as in like he spent probably years thinking about it, how it would go down, and you can really tell how much thought is put into the things that happen. Nothing really felt rushed or cheesy. Like, it all felt very authentic and like it took its time. And I really appreciated too the villain. They didn't necessarily give you like all the details you need about him, which kind of like made him freakier because it's just kind of like stuff that you pick up as it goes on and how it unfolds, how all of these vampire supernatural elements work with one another with this like very intense real world scenario that it's bonded with. So yeah.
And I think it was cool too with like the vampires and stuff that like they were like different from like the traditional what you'd think of like Count Dracula kind of vampires, but also you had like that kind of familiarity with them because they follow the rules of any other vampire that you've ever seen. They can't come in unless you invite them. They're hurt by silver, and a stake to the heart kills them. Garlic will hurt them. Just holy water and all that. It follows the traditional rules of that, but it doesn't look like the 1700s Count Dracula. Like,
yeah, it was very high. It was very high quality, and I feel like 2025. I feel like it's been a good year for like movies that are like a good reason to go see a movie in theaters, and I felt like this movie, at least like for you and me, definitely upheld that as like that was a great payoff reason to go see a movie in theaters. And so yeah, I think on like a scale of 1 to 10 of what I expect from like a movie like that, I gave it like probably like a 9. That was pretty great.
Yeah, that's kind of how I think about it too, and like how you were talking about like the reason to go to theaters and stuff like that. The fact that I got that much joy and entertainment out of an $11 movie ticket, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I would have paid $30 for a ticket to something that cool. You know what I mean?
I've been thinking about it all day since we watched it.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah, you asked me when you first got here. You're like, "Oh, have you thought about Sinners anymore?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, actually, I've been thinking about it quite a bit today." And you're like, "Yeah, same."
Yeah.
So we'll move on from Sinners and to more horror stuff.
We will
shortly.
lift the spoiler warning.
Yeah, spoiler warning gone. But just if you haven't seen Sinners yet, and for some reason you want to,
you just listen to us spoil most of the movie.
Yeah. Well, if not, then go watch it. It's awesome.
Yeah. All right, but yeah, on to just kind of like generally some horror movie stuff. What kind of like horror movies do you feel like you enjoy the most, like that you seek out premise wise?
I don't know. Like there's like the really scary, like spooky, like paranormal, like ghosts and stuff that I really like. Can't go wrong with the classics though, like the old slasher movies and stuff like that. I think the thing about those for me is like they're just nostalgic. Not necessarily like great movies, but they're nostalgic and they kind of invoke that kind of nostalgic feeling like the old 80s slasher. It's a feeling that you can't get from a lot of other movies. But in terms of like my favorite horror movies, or like stuff that's like similar to like Insidious. The Insidious series is probably my favorite horror series of all time. But things like that where it's like the characters, they're in like most if not all of them. There's a storyline that kind of continues. It's like not necessarily all the same thing, but you move along with the characters that you know already and stuff like that. Sure. And then, like, just, I don't know, anything with, like, a cool premise. There's a lot of horror movies nowadays where it's, like, just, oh, yeah, there's this ancient, artifact, and now there's a ghost after you, stuff like that. And I'm like, that's fine. But, like, I don't know. I think if they're, like, interesting, that's kind of what gets me. If there's, like, something more to it than just, like, oh, there's bad stuff happening, and it's spooky.
Yeah, there's those movies where, like Insidious, and, like, I feel like I pair in my mind a lot like Insidious with like The Conjuring. They're very like easy to digest premises, like it's somebody's haunted or there's like ghosts following this person or they're in a possessed place. I feel like now the thing is like if a horror movie doesn't have a more unique tinge to it, it doesn't grab you because it's like, oh, a lot of movies can come out and just be like, it's a scary movie about somebody getting possessed or like a ghost or here's like a new slasher. There has to be something new about it, whether it's like the style or the reason for what's going on or like the supernatural properties of what's going on with the ghosts and stuff. But for me, I tend to like horror movies where there's a paranormal or supernatural element to it. And I've watched some with like where it's just a crazy person or a serial killer or whatever, and I don't mind those. It's just I feel like there's a little bit too many of them. But going back to what you said, yeah, horror movies nowadays have to kind of, or they have a hard time grasping that like classic horror movie feel of like Nightmare on Elm Street and like Friday the 13th and stuff, and so those are always remainders of like classic horror movies. But yeah, I do like the more unique paranormal movies.
I think, well, like we talked about, like the classic horror movies and stuff. For me, those are kind of like they are horror movies, or they are. That's what they were made for. They were supposed to be scary, and at the time they were. But I think that they're kind of just so outclassed and outdated now that they're kind of in a category of their own. Like that's like 80s slasher, which isn't necessarily like it is like the premise. It is, but it's not the same as like one thing about like scary movies. Like I don't really put those in the same as like okay, like that's a scary movie because they're they're not. They're kind of outdated and stuff. And also, I feel differently about them. Probably a little better about them than I do more like current scary movies and horror movies and stuff like that. Like I hold them to a higher pedigree just because of nostalgia and I like them.
And they like set like the baseline of what a horror movie should get out of you too. And now I feel like there's so many like run of the mill horror movies where it's like, oh no, there's a new stranger in town and they have like a dark secret. Yeah. Stuff kind of like that. Yeah. Where somebody can come up with any fill in the blank to that and people are like, oh my gosh, it's a new scary movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, what are like some of your all-time like specific favorite movies? Like you said Insidious, but like what else do you
Insidious think? I really do like Insidious and The Conjuring. Both are super awesome.
I haven't seen all the Insidious movies, but I do enjoy the Conjuring movies.
I think, well, the Babadook is pretty good. It's
different.
Yeah, it's kind of odd, but I've always really liked it. Yeah, I don't know. I think if you do want to count like the slasher movies and stuff, because I guess they are horror movies, but I think the original Friday the 13th is probably like my all-time favorite.
Really?
Just because, yeah, it's so good.
Nice.
And then, I don't know, if you want to count Gremlins, I do like Gremlins quite a bit. It's not necessarily, I mean, it's kind of...
It's like fun.
Yeah.
It's like fun horror.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, like, that's the stuff where I'm like, what do you even count? Because it's supposed to be like horror, but, like, what all do you even count when it comes to stuff like that? Like, I don't even know.
Yeah. I feel like it's kind of like for me like Child's Play. I don't get scared by Child's Play, but it is still like horror. Like it's Chucky running around with knives stabbing people.
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think your favorite is, or are some of them?
Not by like getting scared by them. Like there's definitely like unsettling parts to them. But recently I rewatched The Shining, which I don't even necessarily think of as like super horror movie, but it is like a horror movie, and I thought it was really good when I rewatched it, because I watched it maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, and I felt like I had a harder time following it. But you go like revisit a movie a few years later and you watch it like it's a different thing. I really enjoyed it a lot more. So that's definitely up there. And then one that I really enjoyed, and I don't even know if it's supposed to be a straight up horror movie, but I really enjoyed it, is Trick or Treat.
Oh yes,
That movie is so much fun.
I forgot about that, but that's also one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah,
There's
that
so
movie
many in
was
the
so
genre
fun.
that if I don't have a list, I feel like I get like lost. But that is one of my favorites. Me and you watched that together.
Yeah, that was like 2 years ago.
Yeah, 2 years ago, like right around Halloween. Because I saw it before that, but I told you we should watch it. And then, yeah,
that movie's a lot of fun. And I know you kind of feel the same way about this. I think from when we've talked about it, but you and I don't really get like super freaked out by horror movies anymore. I attribute that to I watched Hereditary like 5 years ago, and it scared me so much. Like I'm like 19 years old and I like had to sleep with my light on. That movie was so scary, and I feel like it numbed me to how scary other movies are that I've watched. But yeah, what do you think about Hereditary?
I didn't love it. It was freaky. One of those movies that just really makes your skin crawl. I didn't love it as a movie, but I mean, it was fine. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't like, the best thing I've ever seen. I think, probably for me, the scariest movie that I've ever watched, or I don't know, one that I just think is really scary. It had a big impact on me, like fear-wise. Probably As Above, So Below.
Ooh.
I've seen that a couple times now, but the first time I watched it, I was like young. It was when it came out. I saw it in theaters. I don't even know how old I was. Way too young to be going to see that. But that one, it always just freaked me out. It's so weird.
Sure. I know, like, in the past, some of the movies that have, like, really freaked me out. This is the first time I watched Paranormal Activity. I thought it was, like, the scariest movie I'd ever seen, because I get really unnerved by, like, eeriness in, like, supernatural ghost story movies. So, like, there's all the scenes of in the first one, like, the girlfriend getting possessed, and she, like, just gets up and, like, stands there for hours. There's, like, you just hear creaks and noises all night, and it just escalates and escalates. So anytime I've seen it, and this is why I really got freaked out by Hereditary, is because, there's, like, the people standing in the dark, and, like, things going on that you might not see, and then once you see it, it's like, oh my gosh, what is that? Those are the kind of things that really used to freak me out.
You know what I think you should watch? I don't know if it would freak you out, but I think you might like it. It Comes at Night. Have you seen that?
I don't think I've seen that, no.
Watch that. That's like my movie recommendation for you.
Alright.
I don't know if you'd like it or not, but I think you should watch that.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. I think one horror movie, and I like horror movies like this that are kind of not like just regular people living in a house, but there's like kind of an underlying extended scenario to what's going on. So a movie that I watched when I was younger that freaked me out in like the first 10 minutes and I couldn't watch past it, but then I revisited it and I was like, this is a great story, is The Thing from like the 1980s. I couldn't watch it the first time because there was a scene with like the alien and that getting trapped in a room with a bunch of sled dogs, and it doesn't go well, and it really upset me. But then I like went back and watched it, and it's very like, you know the premise of that, like the alien can make itself look like other people, and it's smart, and I just really like that idea that it's always there. You just don't know who it is, and even by the end of the movie, you don't figure out who it was, if they got it, or if somebody was lying about it. I thought that movie was great, and I think had a good impact on watching horror movies for me.
Yeah. I think... Oh, I was going to ask you, what do you think is probably like the most overrated horror movie that you know of? Because I have one in my mind right now.
Ooh. That's a good question. I don't dislike it. I like the first one a lot. But I feel like, and it's kind of the point of the whole movie, I don't watch it as a horror movie, but I think Scream is a little overrated, and I understand the hype, but I didn't watch it for like the longest time. So then when I did watch it, I'm like, okay, it's just like a serial killer movie. Like,
Yeah.
it's not really like scary, but that's kind of the
Yeah.
point. They like poke fun at the whole
Yeah.
scenario.
Yeah. I think my most overrated horror movie would probably be what is it called? Sinister.
Ooh, I like just watched that
I
like, a
think
couple weeks ago.
I didn't dislike it, and it was kind of freaky and stuff, but I think everything that I had ever heard about it before I watched it, it's the scariest movie of all time. It's so scary. It's so, scientifically, it's the scariest movie ever made. And then I watched it, and I was like, this is like pretty generic, like normal
Yeah.
horror movie stuff.
I didn't
like.
think it was the scariest movie ever made. I thought like it was a unique thing, like how the horror of it unfolds, kind of
Yeah.
like with like the homemade movies and stuff. And I thought that was interesting. So when I watched it, I was more just like kind of sitting there being like, I want to know why this is happening and like what the story is
Yeah.
going on. It didn't really like scare me.
No.
I mean, it like at the very end there was a jump scare, and I was like,
Yeah.
well, that was just unnecessary. But I liked the movie.
See, that's kind of how I felt about it. And I guess overrated is a little harsh because I liked the movie.
Mm.
But going into it, I was expecting to be, pooping my pants the entire time. But it was just kind of normal, generic horror movie stuff. So I was like, that's
So
fine.
this kind of leads well into like another question that I was going to ask you is like, what is something in a horror movie, or just like things that kind of take you out of watching a horror movie while you're watching it?
Like things
that don't work for you, or
just
like you're watching it and you're like, oh great, it's that again.
My biggest thing, and I know there's a lot of people who are probably gonna hate me for this, but my biggest thing in horror movies is when it starts getting like so gory that it's like uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what even is this isn't scary. This is gross. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like this isn't scaring me at all. It's just nasty.
Yeah.
That's really, I'm like, oh, whatever.
I think you and I, we both had that when we watched Evil Dead Rise.
Yeah.
It was like creepy, but it was just so like disgusting.
Yeah, it was so nasty that I was like, well, I don't even care about what's going on. Like, please just don't make me see that again.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, chill.
Yeah.
That's like the biggest thing that I'm like, if like I will purposely just like not watch a movie if they're like, oh yeah, like it's so gory, it's so bloody.
Yeah.
I'm like,
yeah, for
that's
sure.
fine.
I think something that I have like that, it's not necessarily for movies, but it's for franchises, is when they like become self-aware of the fact that they're on like the 7th movie of a horror movie franchise, so it just becomes a complete joke. So my favorite example of this is a few years ago when you and I were doing that movie marathon where we watched Trick or Treat. We watched Jason Takes Manhattan.
Yeah.
It's just almost a straight up comedy.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've ever... That had, like, not just in a horror movie, but that had one of the funniest scenes I've ever seen in any movie, when, like, the boxer guy of the group is fist fighting Jason and then gets his head punched clean off, but it's clearly just a mannequin head.
Yeah.
I, like, lost it laughing because I was not expecting that at all.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that movie... When franchises get to that point where they're just kind of poking fun... This is mainly with, like, classic horror movie franchises.
Old slashers and stuff.
Yeah, I feel like that's when I start to really be like, okay, what was the intent of making this movie?
Yeah, like, why'd you even spend the money to make this?
Yeah. But yeah, I think another thing I was going to ask is just, like, what's some of the most, like, weirdest or, like, most out there horror movies you've ever seen?
Oh boy, that's a good question.
I know I can point, since like we're Rob Eggers fans, like
Oh yeah.
most of his are
Yeah,
kind of like
all
that.
of them.
So like The Witch, The Lighthouse.
Yeah.
Those
I
are-
would say The Lighthouse is probably.
That's one of the weirdest movies.
Yeah, one of the weirdest movies. See, but there's some of the stuff with like things like that where, I don't know, like I don't even count some of that stuff as like horror because like that's like more psychological thriller,
Mhm.
which in an episode about horror movies. This probably isn't that good to say. I like horror movies and I'd watch them, but I would rather just watch any psychological thriller over a horror movie, because horror is, like we were talking about earlier, a lot of times it loses a lot of the story in just trying to be scary, where psychological thriller is more so like, here's a good story with scary aspects, and that's kind of more my speed. But anyway, apart from that, I don't know. I think weirdest. I mean, Babadook's probably up there. Babadook's kind of odd.
I have one, and I'll leave you with this as like my recommendation for you is to watch this movie. There's a movie, I think it was in the 90s, with, if I remember it right, it's Lawrence Fishburne and Sam Neill, like the guy from Jurassic Park. It's called Event Horizon, and the premise alone is like real out there, but it was actually like, when I watched this, I didn't know it was going to be a horror movie, and then I was like, what is going on? It's literally some scientists in like the future, in like deep space, are running experiments out there, and they get like this distress call from another space station doing the same thing, and they go and visit it, and it's like completely empty. But what it turns out being is that they accidentally somehow opened like a portal to hell on board this spaceship, and it was freaky, it was weird, and it was definitely like a horror movie. I haven't felt like I've watched that before, and I like looked into this movie because I was like, I feel like I've never seen anything about this. Apparently, like, it didn't do well at its release, but it's one of those movies where it has a following that's grown over time, so that's my recommendation for you.
I will. That does sound interesting. I'll keep an eye on that one.
Yeah.
I think. Oh, one last thing. I thought of one as we were talking. That's probably the weirdest one, and I did not like this movie, but Barbarian. I hated Barbarian. It was so weird. I wasn't really scared. I was kind of, most of the movie I was like, what is going on? And then, yeah, I don't know. I hated that movie. It was weird.
Yeah.
Not my speed, but
I think it's by the same director. Something like down the line, I think I told you about, is that movie Weapons.
Yeah.
That looks interesting.
I'm more interested in that than I am like Barbarian.
Yeah.
But I am interested.
I'm very interested to see what's going on there. But yeah, I think that about wraps it up for today.
Yep, I think so. Well, this was the Mild Opinion Podcast, episode 7, horror movie edition. And go watch Sinners if you have not.
It's very worth it.
And do not watch Barbarian. That'll be it.
All right.
See you next episode.